Hey everyone, I'm JT. This is a lesson about complex sentences, and if you're interested in knowing about that, you've come to the right place. The first thing that you will need to know is you'll need to know what a noun is, you will need to know what a verb is, a subject, and a predicate. If you're not sure about these things, you'll want to find out about those before you come here. Now, what we're going to learn are the following. We need to know what an independent clause is. We'll learn that. What dependent clauses are, what subordinating conjunctions are, and then also we'll learn about how to use commas when you are dealing with complex sentences, when to use them and when not to use them. And so here we go. If you need to take any notes, feel free to pause the video. You'll want to get some kind of a writing tool because there are a few little exercises that I've got in this video that you will pause the video and do those. So, first of all, clauses. A clause is a subject and a predicate. So, it has to have a subject and then it has to have a verb. And there are a couple of different kinds of clauses that we'll be dealing with today. First one is an independent clause. Now, independent clause can stand as a complete sentence. So, this is a clause that you can begin it with a capital letter, end it with a period, and it is a complete sentence. And the example that I provided for you is the snail crawled along the sidewalk. We have a subject, the snail, and we have what the snail is doing. Crawled along the sidewalk, that is the predicate. So that can stand by itself. It's an independent clause. So the other kind of clause that we will be dealing with today is called a dependent clause. Dependent clauses cannot stand alone as complete sentences. You've got to connect them to an independent clause. Let me give you an example. I've just slightly modified the sentence we looked at a minute ago, or the clause we looked at a minute ago. While the snail crawled along the sidewalk. The word while tells us that something else must be happening. And so we need an independent clause. So independent clause, the snail crawled along the sidewalk. I add that word while, and it becomes a dependent clause. It cannot stand by itself. So to make this easy for you, I've highlighted all of the independent clauses in yellow and all of the dependent clauses in blue. So to create a complex sentence, we need to have a dependent clause and an independent clause. You cannot have two dependent clauses or two independent clauses. One must be a dependent clause, the other must be independent. I like to think of it as the independent clause is the train engine. That's what's got all of the power, and that's what moves the train. The dependent clause can't go anywhere by itself. It needs to be pulled, just like the car on the train. So it's like the independent clause is the engine, the dependent clause is the car. That's one way to think of it. So let's take a look at an example of a complex sentence here. While the snail crawled along the sidewalk, Jimbo smashed it with his shoe. So Jimbo smashed it with his shoe. That is an independent clause. It can stand alone as a complete sentence. While the snail crawled along the sidewalk, on the other hand, doesn't make any sense if it's by itself. It needs to be with the second part of the sentence. Jimbo smashed it with his shoe. So that's a complex sentence. It tells us that two things are happening at the same time. Now I've got a little exercise for you. What I want you to do is take a look at these 6 clauses, and I want you to identify which ones are independent and which ones are dependent. The ones that are independent, I want you to, next to the number, mark it with an IC. Go ahead and write these down on your. You don't have to write the sentences down, but I want you to write the numbers with the answers. Independent clauses, you will identify them by writing IC. Dependent clauses, you will identify them by writing DC. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. Independent clauses are identified with IC. Dependent clauses are identified with DC. Go ahead and do that. Okay, let's see how you did. These are the answers. So the first one, we held the meeting yesterday. That's an independent clause. That can stand on its own. After Jane came home from St. Louis is dependent. We need to know what happened after Jane came home. Number 3, since you already had breakfast, dependent clause. Number 4, while the city planners went over the new design, dependent clause. I only made coffee. Number 5 is an independent clause. And the subway train is always late. That is also an independent clause. How'd you do on those? All right, let's talk about conjunctions now. There are a couple different kinds of conjunctions. Conjunctions are words that connect words, phrases, and clauses together. The most common ones are and, but, and or. We also have nor, for, so, and yet. Those are not quite as common. Those are called coordinating conjunctions. That's not what we're talking about today, but I bring it up because that is usually what people think of when they think of conjunctions. So a couple of examples using that kind of a conjunction. We have 2 independent clauses here. I must wash the dishes and Janie must put them away. We can connect those 2 independent clauses using the word and. Each clause has the same amount of importance as the other clause. And another example using the word but. We flew to Miami to catch a cruise ship. Our plane was late. I've got these 2 independent clauses connected using the word but. So these are called compound sentences, and I'm just showing these to you as non-examples. This is not what we're learning about today, but I think we need to look at these just so you understand that there are a couple of different types of conjunctions. The kind of conjunction that we're concerned with today is the subordinating conjunction, and there are a lot of these. Here's a list. I'm sure you could find a list of these in a book or on the internet somewhere. But we've got after, although, as, because, before, how, if, once, since, and then also we have than, that, though, until, when, where, and whether, and while. So there are a bunch of those. I don't know that you have to remember all of them, but it's good to at least know where a list is so you can look at it. And one of the ways that you can identify a complex sentence is, does it have a subordinating conjunction in it? Now, the word subordinating means to make something lower or to bring something down in importance. The prefix sub means below, and then ordinating means to put in order. So you are putting it in an order below. You're making one of these clauses less important than the other. And the purpose of a subordinating conjunction is to introduce a dependent clause. It's the dependent clause that has the subordinating conjunction in it. And so let's take a look at how we use commas with complex sentences. Okay, there are a couple ways you can do this. You can have the independent clause at the beginning of the sentence, followed by the dependent clause. In this case, you don't need a comma. All right, but if you put the dependent clause first, then you do want a comma, and then that will be followed by the independent clause. Let's look at a couple examples. First example says, since you already had breakfast, comma, I only made coffee. Now here we have since as the subordinating conjunction, and so we know that this first clause is our dependent clause because it's got that subordinating conjunction in it. Therefore, we need the comma following breakfast, and then we have our independent clause right here. Now, in the sentence below, I've just taken these 2 clauses and I've just changed them around. And so I have, I only made coffee since you already had breakfast. In that case, we don't need a comma because the independent clause comes first. So now I'm going to have you, actually, let's look at one more example before we do our exercise. After Jane came home from St. Louis, we held the meeting. Again, after is a subordinating conjunction, and after Jane came home from St. Louis, that is a dependent clause. The independent clause comes after. We held the meeting. We need the comma. On the bottom, I've just changed the order around, and the independent clause comes first. We held the meeting after Jane came home from St. Louis. So after Jane came home from St. Louis, that is the dependent clause. It comes second. We don't need a comma. So now you're going to decide which of the following sentences need commas, and I want you to write down the subordinating conjunctions for each one as well. So tell me which ones of, or tell yourself which of these have commas in them, and then see if you can figure out what the subordinating conjunction is. Go ahead and let me get this lined up so that you can see all of the sentences. Go ahead and pause the video and do that. Okay, well, let's see how you did. Number one, since the tickets were sold out, we couldn't go to the concert. That one does need a comma, and the subordinating conjunction is since. Second one, Maria and Hassan took the dog for a walk while Mr. Price was reading the newspaper. In this case, we don't need a comma because Maria and Hassan took the dog for a walk. That is the independent clause. And while is our subordinating conjunction. No comma in that one. Once you get older, you'll understand. Okay, once is our subordinating conjunction. So we know that that first clause is our dependent clause. And we put our comma right there. Although the deadline was yesterday, we didn't finish the job. Although is our subordinating conjunction, and we need a comma right there. So I hope this tutorial has helped you. Go ahead and review it if you need to, and thank you for viewing.